The frozen surface of the lake cracked beneath Olivia Gardner's boots like a gunshot splitting the January air, and in the half second before she plunged through, her only thought was that she should have listened to her father's warning about the unseasonable warmth that week in 1878. The shock of the water stole her breath instantly. Raton, New Mexico rarely saw winters this brutal, and the lake that formed in the valley between the mesa and the foothills had frozen solid only 2 weeks prior during an unexpected cold snap. But 3 days of warmer weather had weakened the ice, and now Olivia found herself sinking into darkness so complete and cold it felt like being swallowed by the earth itself. Her heavy wool coat became an anchor, dragging her down even as her lungs screamed for air she could not take. She kicked frantically, her skirts tangling around her legs, and her gloved hands reached upward toward the pale circle of light that marked the hole she had fallen through. But the current beneath the ice was stronger than she expected, pulling her sideways away from the opening. Her fingers scraped against the underside of the frozen surface, finding no purchase, no way to break through again. The water pressed in on her from all sides, so cold it burned, and her vision began to narrow into a tunnel. She thought of her mother, who had died bringing her into this world 20 years ago, and wondered if this was how she would leave it, drowned in a lake that should not even exist in this high desert country, trapped beneath ice that had betrayed her weight. Then something crashed through above her, and strong hands seized her arms. The world became a confusion of movement and pressure and the terrible continued absence of air. She felt herself being hauled upward with a force that seemed impossible, felt the ice scraping against her shoulders and back as she was dragged through an opening wider than the one she had fallen through. And then miraculously, there was air again, burning her throat as she gasped and choked, coughing up water that tasted of minerals and earth. "Breathe! Just breathe!" a man's voice said, urgent and rough. "I have got you. You are safe now." Olivia could not stop coughing long enough to respond. She was dimly aware of being lifted, of strong arms carrying her away from the treacherous lake, of the sound of ice cracking further behind them as more of the surface gave way. Her rescuer moved quickly despite her weight, and she felt the solid ground of the shore beneath them before she finally managed to draw a full breath without coughing. "We need to get you warm," the man said. "Can you stand?" She tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering too violently. When she opened her eyes, she saw a face above hers, strong-featured and weathered by sun and wind, with dark eyes that held genuine concern. His black hair was plastered to his head, dripping water, and she realized with a start that he was soaking wet, that he had gone into the water after her. "My horse," he said, and she felt herself being lifted again. Everything seemed to be happening at a great distance, as though she were watching it happen to someone else. She was so cold that she had stopped shivering, which some part of her mind recognized as dangerous, but she could not seem to make her body respond the way she wanted it to. The horse was a large bay gelding, and the man somehow managed to mount while still holding her, settling her in front of him and wrapping his coat around both of them. "My ranch is closer than town," he said, and she felt his chest against her back, felt the horse begin to move beneath them at a pace faster than a walk, but controlled enough not to jostle her too severely. 5 minutes. You can make it 5 minutes." Olivia was not certain she could, but she did not seem to have much choice in the matter. She focused on breathing, on the warmth of the man behind her that barely cut through the cold, consuming her, on staying conscious. The landscape passed in a blur of brown earth and scattered pinon pines, the Sangre de Cristo Mountains rising in the distance, still capped with snow despite the recent warm spell. True to his word, they reached a small ranch house in what felt like both an eternity and no time at all. The man dismounted and pulled her down with him, carrying her up the steps of the porch and kicking the door open. Inside, the house was dim but blessedly warm, and he set her on her feet just long enough to strip the sodden coat from her shoulders. "We need to get you out of these wet clothes," he said, and then seemed to realize how that sounded. "I will turn my back. There are blankets on the bed there. Wrap yourself in them." He moved to the fireplace and began building up the fire that had been reduced to embers, keeping his back to her as promised. Olivia's fingers were so numb she could barely work the buttons of her dress, and her coordination was compromised by the cold and the shock. It took her far longer than it should have to peel away the layers of wet fabric, her undergarments clinging to her skin like ice. When she was finally bare, she grabbed the blankets from the bed and wrapped them around herself, her whole body shaking so violently now that she could barely stand. "All right," she managed to say through chattering teeth. He turned and immediately came to her, guiding her to a chair near the now blazing fire. "Keep those blankets tight around you," he said. "I need to change as well, or we will both end up with pneumonia." He moved to a trunk in the corner and pulled out dry clothes, then stepped into what appeared to be a small bedroom off the main room. Olivia huddled in the blankets, as close to the fire as she dared, and tried to will warmth back into her body. Her feet ached terribly as sensation began to return to them, and her hands felt like they had been beaten with hammers. When the man emerged again, dressed in dry trousers and a clean shirt, he brought more blankets and draped them over her shoulders. "Can you drink something warm?" he asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice yet. He moved to the stove and put a kettle on, then began preparing tea with an efficiency that suggested he was accustomed to taking care of himself. While the water heated, he crouched in front of her and gently took one of her hands in his, examining her fingers carefully. "No frostbite that I can see," he said. "That is good. You were not under for long, and we got you warm quickly enough. How do you feel?" "Cold," Olivia managed. "But better. Thank you. You saved my life." "I was fortunate to be nearby," he said. "I was checking on my cattle in the north pasture when I saw you walking across the ice. I started riding toward you to warn you off, but then I saw the ice give way." He shook his head. "That lake is treacherous this time of year. It freezes because of the altitude and the cold snaps, but it never freezes solid enough to be safe. The springs that feed it keep the water moving underneath." "I did not know," Olivia said. "I have only been in Rayton for a month. I came from Kansas City to keep house for my father. He is the new doctor in town." "Dr. Gardner," the man said, recognition in his voice. "I have heard of him. I am Xavier Barrett. I have a small ranch here, about 3 miles northeast of town." The kettle began to whistle, and Xavier rose to prepare the tea. He brought her a cup, wrapping her hands around it carefully. The warmth of the ceramic against her palms was almost painful, but she welcomed it. She sipped the tea slowly, feeling it burn a path down her throat and into her stomach. "What were you doing out there?" Xavier asked, taking a seat across from her with his own cup of tea. "Being foolish," Olivia admitted. "My father was called out to the Morrison ranch this morning to tend to Mrs. Morrison, who is with child and having difficulties. I decided to take a walk because the weather seemed pleasant, and I thought I saw something on the far side of the lake. A bird, perhaps, or some small animal. I thought the ice would hold. People in town said it had been solid for 2 weeks." "It was until the weather warmed," Xavier said. "But even when it seems solid, it is not safe. The lake is fed by underground springs that never freeze. They keep the water moving, and that prevents the ice from forming properly in places." He paused, studying her with those dark eyes. "You are very fortunate I happened to be there." "I know," Olivia said quietly. "I thought I was going to die. I could not find the hole I fell through. The current pulled me away from it, and I could not break through the ice." "The cold would have taken you in minutes if you had not drowned first," Xavier said, his voice matter of fact but not unkind. "I am glad I was able to reach you in time." They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. Olivia studied him over the rim of her teacup, noting the lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work, the quiet competence with which he moved. He was probably close to her own age, perhaps a year or two older, and there was something steady about him that made her feel safe. "I will need to get word to my father," she said. "He will worry when I do not return home." "Your clothes need to dry first," Xavier said, and you need to warm up completely. Another hour, at least. Then I will take you back to town. He glanced toward the window. It will be evening by then. Your father will likely be home. Olivia nodded, knowing he was right. She could not very well ride back to town, wrapped in nothing but blankets, and her body was still recovering from the shock of the cold water. She took another sip of tea and felt some of the tension begin to leave her shoulders. Tell me about your ranch, she said, wanting to fill the silence with something other than her own thoughts about how close she had come to dying. Xavier's expression softened slightly. It is small, he said. 200 acres, mostly grazing land. I run about 50 head of cattle, and I have a dozen horses that I breed and train. I came here 5 years ago from Texas, looking for land of my own. Raton seemed like a good place to settle. It is growing with the railroad coming through, but it is not so big that a man cannot make his way. Do you run the ranch alone? Mostly, Xavier said. I have a hand who comes in during roundup and branding and when I need help with the horses. But day to day, it is just me. I prefer it that way. Too many years working on other men's ranches, taking orders. I wanted something that was mine. Olivia understood that. She had spent most of her life in her aunt and uncle's house in Kansas City after her mother died, always feeling like a guest, always aware that she was dependent on their charity. When her father had written to say he was moving to New Mexico territory to start a practice and asking if she would come keep house for him, she had said yes immediately. It was a chance to have a home that was truly hers, even if she was still living under her father's roof. I understand wanting something of your own, she said. That is part of why I came here. To build a life, not just live in someone else's. Xavier looked at her with what might have been approval. It is a hard land, he said, but it rewards those who are willing to work for it. They talked for another hour as Olivia warmed herself by the fire and her clothes dried on a line Xavier strung near the stove. He told her about the ranch, about the challenges of raising cattle in country that could be unforgiving, about the satisfaction of working with horses and seeing them respond to patient training. She told him about Kansas City, about her father's work as a doctor, about her own desire to be useful and to contribute something beyond keeping a tidy house. By the time her clothes were dry enough to wear, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Olivia dressed in the small bedroom, her garments still slightly damp but wearable, and emerged to find Xavier waiting with his coat on. Ready? He asked. She nodded, and they went out to where his horse was tied. Xavier mounted first and then offered her his hand, pulling her up to sit behind him this time. Olivia wrapped her arms around his waist, acutely aware of the solid warmth of him, of the way his body moved with the horse's gait as they started toward town. The ride took longer than it had coming out to the ranch, with darkness falling, and Xavier keeping the horse at a careful walk. Olivia found herself grateful for the pace, for the chance to settle her thoughts, for the unexpected comfort of another person's presence after the terror of being trapped beneath the ice. When they reached Raton, the streets were lit by lanterns and windows and the occasional street lamp. Xavier guided his horse to the house at the edge of town that served as both her father's home and his medical office, where light glowed in the windows. Before they had even dismounted, the door opened and her father rushed out. Olivia! Dr. Gardner was a tall, lean man with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed little. Those eyes took in her disheveled appearance, the damp clothes, the way she was riding behind a man he did not know, and his expression shifted from relief to concern. What happened? Where have you been? I fell through the ice on the lake, Olivia said as Xavier helped her dismount. This is Xavier Barrett. He pulled me out and took me to his ranch to warm up. He saved my life, Father. Dr. Gardner's expression changed again, this time to something that looked like fear, followed by profound gratitude. He extended his hand to Xavier, who had dismounted as well. I owe you a debt I can never repay, he said. Please, come inside. Let me examine my daughter, and then you must allow me to thank you properly. There is no need, Xavier said, but he allowed himself to be ushered inside nonetheless. The house was warm and comfortable, furnished simply but with care. Doctor Gardner led Olivia to a chair and began examining her with the thoroughness of his profession, checking her fingers and toes for frostbite, listening to her lungs, asking questions about how she felt and whether she had any pain or numbness. When he was satisfied that she was all right, he turned to Xavier. "You went into the water after her," he said, "and it was not a question." "I did," Xavier confirmed. "Then you risked your own life to save hers?" Dr. Gardner's voice was rough with emotion. "I do not know how to thank you adequately, Mr. Barrett. My daughter is everything to me. If I had lost her—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "I am only glad I was there," Xavier said. "Anyone would have done the same. Not anyone would have had the courage or the strength," Dr. Gardner said. He moved to a cabinet and pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses. "Please sit. Let me at least offer you a drink and a meal." Xavier hesitated, glancing at Olivia, who nodded encouragingly. "That would be welcome," he said. They sat in the parlor while Dr. Gardner poured the whiskey, and Olivia excused herself to change into dry clothes properly. When she returned, dressed in a clean skirt and shirtwaist with her hair combed and braided, the 2 men were deep in conversation about the ranch and the challenges of practicing medicine on the frontier. She joined them, and her father insisted on preparing a meal despite Xavier's protests that it was not necessary. Over dinner, Olivia found herself watching Xavier, noticing details she had been too cold and shocked to register earlier. The way he listened carefully before speaking, the competence in his hands as he handled his fork and knife, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled, which was not often but seemed genuine when it happened. There was a quietness about him that she found appealing, a sense that he was comfortable with himself and did not need to fill every silence with words. When the meal was finished, Xavier rose to leave. "I should get back to the ranch," he said. "The animals need tending in the morning, and it is a long ride in the dark." "Of course," Dr. Gardner said, rising as well. "But please, Mr. Barrett, consider yourself welcome here any time. And if there is ever anything I can do for you, you have only to ask." "I will remember that," Xavier said. He turned to Olivia. "I am glad you are all right, Miss Gardner. Please be careful around that lake." "I will," Olivia promised. "Thank you again, Mr. Barrett." "For everything." He nodded and put on his hat, and then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Olivia stood at the window and watched him mount his horse and ride away into the darkness, something in her chest tightening at his departure. "That is a good man," her father said quietly from behind her. He did not hesitate to risk himself for someone he did not even know. "I know," Olivia said. She touched her hand to the window glass, feeling its coolness against her palm. "I owe him my life." That night, she lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back under the ice, feeling the current pull her away from the light, feeling the terrible cold and the panic of not being able to breathe. But then she thought of Xavier crashing through the ice after her, of his hands pulling her to safety, of the way he had cared for her without expecting anything in return, and the fear eased. She wondered if she would see him again. The answer came 3 days later when there was a knock at the door in the middle of the afternoon. Olivia answered it to find Xavier standing on the porch, his hat in his hands, looking almost uncertain. "Mr. Barrett," she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "Please come in." "I do not want to intrude," he said. "I was in town buying supplies, and I wanted to see how you are recovering." "I am well," Olivia assured him. "Completely recovered, thanks to you. Please come in, I was just making coffee." He followed her inside, and she busied herself with the coffee pot while he stood somewhat awkwardly in the kitchen. When she turned back to him, she found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "I am glad you are well," he said. I have thought about it several times about how close it was. If I had been a minute later, if I had not been riding that direction. But you were, Olivia said gently, and you saved me. I am here because of you. Still, Xavier said. He paused, then seemed to make a decision. Miss Gardner, I know this may be forward, but I wonder if you would allow me to call on you. Properly, I mean, with your father's permission. Olivia felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. I would like that very much, she said, and I think my father would approve. He has spoken of nothing but your bravery since that day. Xavier's face relaxed into a smile, and Olivia thought it transformed him, made him look younger and less weathered. Then I will speak with him when he returns. When would be a good time? He usually finishes seeing patients by 6 in the evening, Olivia said. Unless there is an emergency, of course. Then I will return this evening, Xavier said. He took the cup of coffee she offered him, and they sat at the kitchen table, talking easily about inconsequential things. Olivia found herself telling him about life in Kansas City, about her aunt's insistence on propriety and social calls and all the things that had made Olivia feel stifled. Xavier told her more about his ranch, about a colt he was training that showed promise, about his plans to expand his herd if the market stayed strong. When he finally left to finish his errands in town, Olivia found herself counting the hours until he would return. She prepared dinner with extra care, wanting everything to be perfect, and when her father came home, she told him immediately that Xavier had called and wished to speak with him. Did he now, Doctor? Gardner said, his eyes twinkling. And how do you feel about that, Olivia? I would like it very much if you gave him permission to call on me, Olivia said, feeling her cheeks warm. He is a good man, Father, and I enjoy his company. Then I will certainly speak with him, her father said, though I suspect I would have a hard time refusing anything to the man who saved my daughter's life. When Xavier returned that evening, Dr. Gardner invited him into his study, and Olivia tried not to pace in the parlor while they talked. The conversation lasted perhaps 20 minutes, and when they emerged, both men were smiling. Mr. Barrett has my permission to call on you, Dr. Gardner announced. Within reason, of course. I expect propriety to be observed. Of course, sir, Xavier said. He looked at Olivia. Would you be available for a ride this Sunday, Miss Gardner? If the weather is good, I thought I might show you some of the country around here, the parts that are not covered in treacherous ice. Olivia laughed. I would like that very much. Sunday dawned clear and cold, but without wind, and Xavier arrived mid-morning with a gentle mare for Olivia to ride. Dr. Gardner saw them off with admonitions to stay warm and be back before dark, and they set off eastward, away from the lake and toward the foothills. Xavier proved to be an easy companion, pointing out landmarks and features of the landscape, telling her stories about the area and the people who lived there. They rode for over an hour before stopping near a stand of cottonwoods that marked a small stream. Xavier had brought a lunch in his saddlebags, and they sat on a fallen log and ate bread and cheese and apples while the horses grazed nearby. It is beautiful here, Olivia said, looking at the way the sun caught on the snow-capped peaks in the distance. So different from Kansas City. There, everything was buildings and streets and crowds of people. Here you can see for miles. Do you miss it? Xavier asked. Not as much as I thought I would, Olivia admitted. I miss my friends and some of the conveniences, but I do not miss feeling like I was always being judged, always being measured against some standard of what a young lady should be. Here it feels like I can breathe. I know what you mean, Xavier said. That is part of why I left Texas. Too many people telling me what I should do, how I should live. My father wanted me to work his ranch, but it would never have been mine. It would always have been his, and I would always have been just another hand. Here, what I build is mine. They talked until the sun began to sink lower in the sky, and then Xavier reluctantly said they should start back. On the ride home, Olivia found herself riding closer to him than strictly necessary, aware of his presence beside her in a way that made her heart beat faster. Over the following weeks, Xavier called on her regularly. Sometimes they went riding, and sometimes they simply sat in her father's parlor and talked while Dr. Gardner worked in his study or saw patients. Olivia learned that Xavier had grown up on a ranch in Texas, that he had left home at 18 to strike out on his own, that he had worked as a cowhand and a horsebreaker before saving enough money to buy his own land. He learned that she had taught herself to read medical texts from her father's library, that she had once wanted to be a doctor herself, but knew it was not possible for a woman, that she had a gift for drawing and sometimes sketched the plants and animals she saw on their rides. The town began to take notice of their courtship, and Olivia heard the whispers when she went to the general store or the church. Some were approving, noting that Xavier Barrett was a hard-working man with good prospects. Others were less kind, suggesting that Olivia was throwing herself at the first man who showed her attention, or that Xavier was only interested in marrying the doctor's daughter to improve his social standing. Olivia tried to ignore the gossip, but it stung nonetheless. One evening, after a particularly pointed comment from Mrs. Henderson at the mercantile, she came home close to tears. Xavier was sitting in the parlor waiting for her, and he took one look at her face and stood immediately. "What happened?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "Nothing," Olivia said, but her voice betrayed her. "Just gossip, small-minded people with nothing better to do than speculate about others." Xavier guided her to sit down, then took the seat beside her. "What did they say?" "It does not matter." "It does if it upset you," Xavier said gently. "Tell me." So Olivia told him haltingly about the whispers and the speculation, about the suggestion that he was only courting her for her father's status, or that she was being improper by allowing him to call on her so frequently. When she finished, Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "I suppose people will always talk," he said finally. "But I want you to know something, Olivia. I am courting you because from the moment I pulled you from that lake and saw the spirit in your eyes, even as you fought to breathe, I knew you were someone extraordinary. I am courting you because every conversation we have makes me want to know more about you, because you make me laugh and make me think and make me want to be a better man. I am courting you because I am falling in love with you, and I do not give a damn what anyone in this town thinks about it." Olivia felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were not from hurt. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I did not expect it to happen so quickly, but I cannot seem to help it." Xavier reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "Then that is all that matters," he said. "Let them talk. We know the truth." After that, Olivia found it easier to ignore the gossip. She had Xavier, and she had her father's approval, and that was enough. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, their courtship deepened. Xavier took her to the ranch and showed her around properly, introducing her to his cattle and horses, showing her with obvious pride the barn he had built himself and the improvements he had made to the land. Olivia saw the life he was building and found herself wanting to be part of it. In late March, on a day when the first wildflowers were beginning to bloom in sheltered spots, Xavier asked her to ride out with him to a place he wanted to show her. They rode for nearly 2 hours, climbing into the foothills until they reached a meadow that overlooked the valley where ratans sat nestled among the mesas and mountains. "This is the most beautiful spot I have found in all the time I have been here," Xavier said as they dismounted. "I come here sometimes when I need to think." Olivia turned in a slow circle, taking in the view. She could see for miles in every direction, could see the way the land rolled and lifted, could see the silver thread of the stream that fed the treacherous lake where she had nearly died. From up here, it all looked peaceful and perfect, like something from a painting. "It is breathtaking," she said. "I wanted to bring you here because I wanted you to see what I see," Xavier said. He came to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "This land, this place, it is harsh, and it is beautiful, and it is where I want to build my life. But I do not want to build it alone anymore, Olivia. These past few months with you have shown me what I was missing, what I did not even know I wanted until I met you. He turned to face her fully, and Olivia saw that his hands were trembling slightly. Her heart began to beat faster. Olivia Gardner, Xavier said, I know we have not known each other long, but I am certain of my feelings. I love you. I love your courage and your kindness and your curious mind. I love the way you look at the world like it is full of wonders waiting to be discovered. I love the way you make me want to be worthy of you. Will you marry me? Olivia felt tears spill down her cheeks, but she was smiling. Yes, she said. Yes, Xavier, I will marry you. I love you too, so much that it scares me sometimes. Xavier pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Olivia melted into him, feeling like she had finally found the place where she belonged. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless and laughing. I should speak to your father properly, Xavier said. Ask for his blessing. He will give it, Olivia said confidently. He likes you enormously. He says you have integrity and that you work hard and that you make me happy. What more could a father ask for? That evening, Xavier did indeed ask Dr. Gardner for permission to marry Olivia, and her father gave it readily, clasping Xavier's hand and welcoming him to the family. They decided to wait until June for the wedding, to give Olivia time to prepare and to allow for better weather. The next 3 months passed in a blur of activity. Olivia worked with her father's modest funds and her own savings to prepare a trousseau, sewing dresses and linens with the help of some of the women from the church who had warmed to her once her engagement was announced. Xavier worked on expanding the ranch house, adding a second bedroom and a proper kitchen, wanting to have everything ready for his bride. They saw each other as often as they could, stealing moments together between his work and her preparations. Xavier taught Olivia more about ranching, knowing she would need to understand it when she became his wife. Olivia taught Xavier about the medicinal plants her father had been showing her, thinking it might be useful for him to know what to use for common ailments when the doctor was too far away to reach quickly. In late May, a week before the wedding, Xavier invited Olivia to the ranch to see the finished additions to the house. Her father came along as chaperone, and they spent the afternoon admiring Xavier's handiwork. The new rooms were simple but well built, and Olivia could picture herself living there, making it into a real home. As they were preparing to leave, a rider came galloping up the road to the ranch, his horse lathered with sweat. It was Tom Miller, who worked at the livery stable in town. "Doc Gardner," he called out, breathless. "You got to come quick. There has been an accident at the railroad camp. A man got crushed by a load of timber that shifted on the wagon. They say he is bad hurt." Dr. Gardner was already moving toward his horse. "Xavier, can you see Olivia home safely?" "Of course," Xavier said. "Go, doctor. Do what you can for the man." Dr. Gardner rode off with Tom Miller, and Xavier turned to Olivia. "I will take you home now," he said. "Your father may be gone for hours if the injury is as serious as Tom said." They rode back to town together in the golden light of late afternoon, talking about the wedding and their plans for the future. When they reached Olivia's house, Xavier dismounted and helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist. "One more week," he said softly, "and then you will be my wife." "I can hardly believe it," Olivia said. "Sometimes I think about that day on the ice, about how differently things could have ended. If you had not been there, if you had not been brave enough to come after me." "But I was, and I did," Xavier said firmly. "And now we have our whole lives ahead of us. That is what matters, Olivia. Not what could have happened, but what did happen and what will happen." He kissed her gently, mindful that they were on the street where anyone could see, and then helped her stable her horse before mounting his own and heading back to the ranch. Olivia went inside the empty house and began preparing dinner, humming to herself as she worked. Her father did not return until well after dark, looking exhausted but satisfied. "The man will live," he reported. The injury was serious, but I was able to set the broken bones and stitch up the worst of the cuts. He is young and strong. He should recover, though he will need to rest for several weeks." "That is good news," Olivia said, serving him a plate of the stew she had kept warm. "Xavier showed me the additions to the house today. They are wonderful, Father. He has worked so hard to make everything ready." "He is a good man," Dr. Gardner said, not for the first time. "I am glad you're marrying him, Olivia. I think you will be happy together." "I think so too," Olivia said. The wedding took place on a Sunday afternoon in early June in the small church at the center of Raton. Olivia wore a dress of pale blue silk that her aunt had sent from Kansas City as a wedding gift, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Xavier had picked for her that morning. Her father walked her down the aisle, and Xavier waited at the altar in a new suit, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart race. The ceremony was simple and beautiful, presided over by Reverend Thomas, who had come to Raton the previous year. Olivia spoke her vows in a clear voice, promising to love and honor Xavier for the rest of her days, and Xavier's voice was steady and sure as he made the same promises to her. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her with such tenderness that Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. After the ceremony, there was a small gathering at the house with cake and punch and well wishes from the townspeople who had come to celebrate. Olivia accepted their congratulations graciously, even from those who had gossiped about her courtship, and Xavier stood at her side, his hand never far from the small of her back. As the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes and rode out to the ranch together, Xavier's horse pulling a small wagon that held Olivia's trunk and the wedding gifts they had received. The evening was warm and soft, with a breeze that carried the scent of sage and pinon, and Olivia felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. At the ranch, Xavier helped her down from the wagon, and then before she could say anything, swept her up into his arms and carried her over the threshold. Olivia laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck, and Xavier kicked the door closed behind them before setting her gently on her feet. "Welcome home, Mrs. Barrett," he said, and the sound of her new name on his lips made Olivia's heart swell. "It feels like home already," she said, looking around at the house that would now be hers. Xavier had lit lamps before they left for the wedding, and the interior glowed with warm light. That night, they came together as husband and wife for the first time, and Olivia discovered a new kind of intimacy, a new way of being close to someone. Xavier was patient and tender, mindful of her inexperience, and when they finally lay tangled together in the darkness, Olivia felt a sense of completeness she had never known before. "I love you," she whispered against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you too," Xavier murmured into her hair. More than I knew it was possible to love someone. The first months of their marriage were an adjustment as Olivia learned the rhythms of ranch life and her role as Xavier's wife and partner. She rose early to help with the morning chores, feeding the chickens and gathering eggs, helping Xavier with the horses when he needed an extra pair of hands. She learned to cook on the wood stove, to preserve food for the winter, to make soap and candles and all the things that were necessary for life on a remote ranch. But there were joys too. There were evenings spent sitting on the porch together watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. There were rides across the open range, just the two of them and the endless land. There were nights in each other's arms, learning each other's bodies and hearts, building an intimacy that went deeper than Olivia had imagined possible. In August, her father rode out to visit and stayed for dinner. He examined Olivia with a doctor's eye and seemed satisfied with what he saw. "Marriage agrees with you," he said. "You look healthy and happy." "I am both," Olivia confirmed. "Xavier is a wonderful husband, Father. I could not have asked for better." "And you are a wonderful wife," Xavier said from where he was washing dishes at the basin. "She has taken to ranch life like she was born to it, Doctor. I do not know how I managed before she came." "I suspect you managed perfectly well, Doctor," Gardner said with a smile. But I am glad you do not have to manage alone anymore. As summer turned to autumn, Olivia began to notice changes in her body. She was tired more easily, and certain smells made her stomach turn. When her monthly courses failed to arrive for the second time, she knew what it meant, and her heart filled with a mixture of joy and fear. She told Xavier one evening as they sat together after dinner. "I think I am with child," she said quietly, watching his face carefully. Xavier's expression transformed, wonder and joy spreading across his features. "Truly?" he asked, and when she nodded, he pulled her into his arms and held her tightly. "That is wonderful news, Olivia. The most wonderful news." "I am a little frightened," she admitted. "My mother died giving birth to me." "What if?" "No," Xavier said firmly, pulling back to look at her face. "Do not think like that. You are strong and healthy, and you have your father nearby if anything goes wrong. But nothing will go wrong. I will not let it." Olivia knew he could not really prevent anything, but his certainty comforted her nonetheless. They told her father the following week, and he too was overjoyed, though Olivia could see the shadow of old grief in his eyes when he looked at her. He too remembered her mother, the wife he had loved and lost. "I will be with you through it all, Doctor," Gardner promised, "and I will make sure everything goes smoothly. You are healthy and strong, Olivia. You will be fine." The winter passed quietly as Olivia's belly grew round with the child she carried. Xavier was attentive and protective, insisting she rest more and not overwork herself. He took over the heavier chores and hired a young man from town to help with the ranch work so he could spend more time close to the house. On a cold night in late February, Olivia's labor began. Xavier rode hard to fetch her father, and Dr. Gardner arrived within the hour, his medical bag in hand. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the following morning, and there were moments when Olivia was certain she could not continue. But Xavier stayed at her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, and her father monitored her carefully, his professional demeanor masking what she knew must be terrible worry. Finally, as the sun rose over the mountains, Olivia gave birth to a son. The baby boy was healthy and strong, wailing lustily as Dr. Gardner cleaned him and wrapped him in a blanket. When he placed the child in Olivia's arms, she looked down at the tiny face and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "He is perfect," she whispered. "He is," Xavier agreed, his voice rough with emotion. He touched a gentle finger to the baby's cheek. "Our son." They named him James after Xavier's father, and he became the center of their world. Xavier was a devoted father, taking every opportunity to hold his son, to marvel at his tiny fingers and toes, to sing him half-remembered lullabies in Spanish that Xavier's own mother had sung to him. Olivia watched them together and felt a peace settle over her that was profound and complete. As James grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch prospered. Xavier's herd increased, and he gained a reputation for training good horses. Olivia's father visited often, delighting in his grandson, and the house was filled with warmth and laughter. When James was 2 years old, Olivia found herself pregnant again, and the following autumn she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah. 2 years after that came another son, whom they called Michael. The house that had once seemed too large for just the two of them now rang with the sounds of children playing, and Xavier built additions to accommodate their growing family. Life was not without its challenges. There were droughts that made grazing scarce, and winters that were harsh and long. There was the year when illness swept through the cattle and they lost a third of the herd. There was the time when James fell from a horse and broke his arm, and Olivia's heart stopped until her father assured her the boy would be fine. But through it all, Olivia and Xavier faced everything together, their love deepening and maturing with each passing year. They still took rides together when they could, leaving the children with a neighbor and riding out to the meadow where Xavier had proposed, remembering the beginning of their life together. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, after the children were in bed, holding hands and watching the sunset, content in each other's presence. On their 10th anniversary, Xavier gave Olivia a locket with a picture of them from their wedding day inside it. I wanted you to have something to remind you of where we started, he said, though I hope you do not need a reminder. I could never forget, Olivia said, fastening the locket around her neck. Every day I am grateful for what we have built together. For you, for our children, for this life. I am grateful too, Xavier said, especially grateful that I happened to be riding by that lake on that particular day. I think about it sometimes, about how everything could have been different, about how I might never have met you, might never have known this happiness. But you were there, Olivia said, echoing the words he had once said to her. And you saved me in more ways than one. You gave me a life I love, a family I adore, a home that is truly mine. You gave me everything, Xavier. He pulled her close and kissed her, and Olivia thought about the girl she had been, walking across that frozen lake without knowing how close she was to death. She thought about the terror of the water, the cold, the darkness, and then she thought about breaking through into light and air, about strong hands pulling her to safety, about the man who had risked his own life for a stranger and then given her a reason to be glad she had survived. As the years continued to pass, their children grew. James became a skilled horseman like his father, and Sarah showed an aptitude for medicine that delighted her grandfather. Michael was still young, but he had his mother's curiosity and his father's steady temperament. Dr. Gardner aged but remained active, riding out to the ranch regularly to see his daughter and grandchildren. He taught James and Sarah to read using his medical texts, and he told them stories about their mother as a girl, about her courage and her kind heart. Olivia sometimes helped her father with his patients, using the knowledge she had accumulated over the years. She became known as someone who could be called upon in an emergency, who knew which herbs could bring down a fever and how to stitch a wound properly. It was not the same as being a doctor herself, but it was something, and it allowed her to use her mind and her skills in service of others. Xavier expanded the ranch gradually over the years, buying additional land when it became available, building his herd until it was one of the larger operations in the area. But he never forgot what it felt like to work for someone else, to have no say in how things were done, and he treated the men who worked for him with respect and fairness. His reputation grew, and other ranchers sought his advice on horses and cattle alike. On a summer evening when Olivia was 35 years old, she and Xavier sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard before bedtime. James was 15 now, tall and strong, and looking more like his father every day. Sarah was 13, quick-witted and compassionate. Michael was 11, still slight but with a spirit that suggested he would catch up to his brother in time. Do you ever think about Kansas City? Xavier asked. About the life you might have had if you had stayed? Olivia considered the question. Sometimes, she admitted, but not with regret. I think about who I was then, how constrained I felt, how I was always trying to fit into a mold that did not suit me. And then I think about who I am now, here with you and our children, living a life that is real and full and mine. There is no comparison, Xavier. This is where I belong. I feel the same, Xavier said. Everything before you seems like it happened to someone else. My real life began the day I pulled you from that lake. Our real lives began that day, Olivia corrected gently. We saved each other, you and I. You saved my body from the water, and I saved your heart from loneliness. We made each other whole. Xavier squeezed her hand, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. In the distance, the mountains stood eternal and beautiful, and closer by, their children's laughter rang through the air. That night, after the children were in bed, Olivia stood at the window of their bedroom and looked out at the land they had built their life upon. Xavier came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For being you, for finding me that day, for loving me and building this life with me, for giving me everything I did not even know I wanted. I should be thanking you, Xavier said. You took a chance on a cowboy with nothing but a small ranch and big dreams. You made those dreams come true just by being here, by being mine. Ours, Olivia corrected. The dreams were ours, and we achieved them together. They stood there together for a long time, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky, and Olivia thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, about the ice breaking beneath her feet, about the terror and the cold, and the certainty that she was going to die, about strong hands pulling her back to life, about dark eyes filled with concern, about a quiet voice saying, I have got you, you are safe now. She thought about falling in love slowly, and then all at once, about saying yes to a proposal in a mountain meadow, about building a home and a family from nothing but determination and devotion. She thought about every challenge they had faced and overcome together, every joy they had shared, every moment of ordinary happiness that had accumulated into a life well lived. And she knew with a certainty that went bone deep that she would not change a single thing. The ice breaking had been terrifying, but it had led her here to this man and this life and this profound sense of belonging. Everything that had come after had been worth that moment of terror, worth the cold water and the desperate struggle for breath, because Xavier had been there, because he had not hesitated, because he had crashed through the ice after her and pulled her to safety, and then had given her a reason to be grateful for every breath she took afterward. The years continued to unfold in a pattern of seasons and celebrations. James married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property when he was 22, and they built a house on the far edge of Xavier and Olivia's land. Sarah, true to her calling, went to St. Louis to study nursing when such opportunities became available to women, and she returned to Rayton to work alongside her grandfather until his passing when Olivia was 43. Dr. Gardner died peacefully in his sleep one winter night, and Olivia grieved deeply for the father who had been her anchor and her champion. But she took comfort in the fact that he had lived to see his grandchildren grown, had known the joy of watching his daughter build a happy life, had died knowing she was loved and cared for. Michael followed in his father's footsteps, developing a gift for working with horses that surpassed even Xavier's considerable skill. He took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch as Xavier grew older, allowing his parents to slow down and enjoy the fruits of their decades of hard work. When Olivia was 50, she and Xavier became grandparents for the first time when James and his wife had a daughter. More grandchildren followed over the years, and the house was once again filled with the sounds of children, though these belonged to a new generation. On their 25th anniversary, Xavier took Olivia back to the lake where they had met. It was summer now, and the lake was low, the water warm and gentle. They stood at the spot where Olivia had fallen through, where Xavier had crashed through the ice after her, and they held hands and remembered. 25 years, Olivia said. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime. It has been a lifetime, Xavier said. The best lifetime I could have imagined. And it all started here, with you trapped under ice and me too stubborn to let you die. Olivia laughed and leaned into him. I am glad you were stubborn. I am glad you were brave. I am glad you were there, Xavier. For that day and for every day since. They stood there for a while longer, watching the sunlight dance on the water, and then they turned and walked back to their horses hand in hand. The ranch was waiting for them and their children and their grandchildren, and all the ordinary beautiful moments that made up a life shared. As they rode home together, Olivia thought about how strange and wonderful life could be, how a single moment could change everything, how what seemed like tragedy could become the beginning of the greatest blessing. She thought about the girl she had been, walking across that ice, and the woman she had become, and she was grateful for every step of the journey. That evening, surrounded by their children and grandchildren for a celebration dinner, Olivia looked around the table at the family she and Xavier had created and felt a profound sense of satisfaction. This was what mattered, she thought. Not wealth or status or any of the things her aunt had valued back in Kansas City. This mattered. These people, these connections, this love that had grown and deepened and multiplied over the years. When everyone had left and she and Xavier were alone again, they sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the air was warm with the scent of summer flowers. I would do it all again, Olivia said suddenly. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. If I knew then what I know now, I would still walk across that ice because it brought me to you. Xavier turned to look at her, his face soft with love in the starlight. I would crash through that ice 1,000 times over if it meant I could have this life with you, he said. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Olivia Barrett. You always have been, and you always will be. They kissed then, tender and sweet. And Olivia thought that after 25 years of marriage, she still felt the same flutter in her heart that she had felt the first time he kissed her. Some things never changed, and some things only got better with time. The years that followed were gentler, slower. Xavier and Olivia stepped back from the hardest work of the ranch, leaving it to Michael and James while they enjoyed their role as elders of the family. They took trips to visit Sarah in town, where she ran a small clinic that served the growing community. They spent time with their grandchildren, telling them stories about the old days, about how the town had been when they were young, about the challenges and triumphs of frontier life. On winter evenings, they would sit by the fire, and sometimes Olivia would tell the story of how they met, of the ice breaking, and the terror of the cold water, and the strong hands that pulled her to safety. The grandchildren loved the story, gasping at the scary parts and sighing at the romantic parts, and Xavier would smile and add details about how beautiful Olivia had looked, even soaking wet and half frozen, how he had known from that first moment that she was someone special. When Olivia was 60, she and Xavier celebrated their 35th anniversary quietly, just the two of them, at the meadow where he had proposed. They were older now, their hair gray and their faces lined, but the love between them was as strong as it had ever been. 35 years, Xavier said, shaking his head in wonder. Where did the time go? Into building this life, Olivia said, gesturing at the valley spread out below them, where their ranch sat among others, where the town of Raton had grown into a proper community with schools and churches and businesses, into raising our children and watching them become good people, into loving each other and being loved in return. The time went into everything that mattered. You are right, Xavier said, and I would not trade a single moment of it. They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, moving more slowly than they once had, but still comfortable in the saddle, still at home on the land they had worked for so many years. At the house, Michael had dinner waiting for them, and they ate with him and his family, surrounded by the warmth and noise of people who loved each other. That night, lying in bed beside Xavier, listening to his steady breathing as he slept, Olivia thought about the arc of her life, about how far she had come from that frightened girl walking across the ice. She had lived a full life, a good life, a life filled with love and purpose and belonging. She had been a wife and a mother and a grandmother, a partner and a helpmate and a friend. She had known hardship and joy, loss and triumph, the ordinary and the extraordinary. And through it all, Xavier had been at her side, steadfast and true, the man who had saved her life and then made that life worth living. He had been her anchor and her adventure, her safety and her excitement, her home and her horizon. As she drifted off to sleep, Olivia sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the ice that had broken beneath her feet all those years ago, for the cowboy who had been brave enough to crash through after her, for the love that had grown from that moment of terror into a lifetime of happiness. She had been trapped under ice when the lake gave way, and the cowboy had smashed through and dragged her out. But what he had really done was pull her into a life she had not known she was waiting for, into love and family and a sense of belonging that went deeper than she had imagined possible. And she had spent every day since then being grateful for his courage, his strength, and his heart. She had spent every day loving him and being loved in return. And that was the greatest gift she could have asked for. The story of the girl and the ice and the cowboy became a legend in their family, passed down through generations. Their great grandchildren would hear it and marvel at the bravery of their great grandfather, at the courage of their great grandmother who had survived such an ordeal. They would see the way Xavier and Olivia looked at each other, even in their old age, with a tenderness and devotion that transcended time, and they would understand that true love was real, that it could last, that it was worth fighting for and holding on to with everything you had. When Xavier was 70 and Olivia was 68, they sat together on their porch one last time, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Xavier's health had been failing for the past year, and they both knew that their time together was drawing to a close. But there was peace in that knowledge, a sense that they had lived fully and well, that they had no regrets. "I love you," Xavier said, his voice softer now but still steady. "I have loved you from the moment I pulled you from that water, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Olivia said, tears streaming down her face, but her voice strong. "You gave me everything, Xavier. A home, a family, a purpose, a love that sustained me through everything. You were my miracle, and I was yours." "You were," Xavier agreed. He squeezed her hand, and they sat together in the golden light, two people who had built a life and a love that would endure long after they were gone. Xavier passed peacefully in his sleep that night, with Olivia at his side holding his hand. She grieved deeply, as one grieves the loss of half of oneself, but she did not fall apart. She was strong, as she had always been strong, and she had their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to carry her through the darkness. She lived another 10 years after Xavier's death, spending her days surrounded by family, telling stories about her husband and the life they had built together. She watched new babies being born and saw them grow, saw the ranch continue to prosper under her sons and grandsons' management, saw the family she and Xavier had created continue to expand and thrive. And when her own time came to leave this earth, Olivia went peacefully, surrounded by those she loved, with a smile on her face, and the locket Xavier had given her still hanging around her neck. Her last words were, "I am coming, my love," and her family knew she was speaking to Xavier, who had been waiting for her all these years. They buried her next to him on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky so blue it seemed to go on forever. And the story of their love became part of the family's heritage, a reminder that life could change in an instant, that courage and love could triumph over fear and death, that what mattered most was not how long you lived, but how well you loved and were loved in return. The lake where it all began still sits in the valley between the mesa and the foothills, freezing in winter and thawing in spring. And sometimes, when the light is just right and the wind carries the scent of sage across the water, you can almost see them there, a young woman walking across the ice and a cowboy riding to save her, about to begin a love story that would last a lifetime and echo through the generations that followed.